All right. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. We've done 2 shows in the past, almost at a yearly basis. His name is Anthony Bennett. He's a solicitor from the UK. And we spoke initially 2 years ago about the suspicious death of Stuart Lubbock at TV presenter Michael Barrymore's estate. And that was a very well-known case in the UK where a young man was found in a pool. And there was a lot of speculation regarding that. And then we followed up with that. From that, we talked about and documentary that came on about that case titled Dead in the Pool about Stuart Lubbock. So we've covered that. But we're also going to cover that case and some updates about Barrymore, but also some updates of what's happening in the UK in a criminal case, the Daniel Morgan case that I discussed with Kieran Goggins. And there was an inquiry that finally came out with a final report. And Tony's had saga, kind of an involvement with the McCann case. Some people might know about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann that happened, I think, in Portugal. And that's also a very significant criminal case that's happened in the UK. So we're going to cover some ground. But Solicitor Anthony Bennett, are you there?
Thank you for having me on. Yes, I'm here.
Awesome. Well, thanks for agreeing to the interview. For people who may not have seen those earlier 2 shows we did, can you talk about your background and how you became involved in the suspicious death of Stuart Lubbock?
Right, I'll make it short. I worked for many years as a social worker, welfare rights advisor. I then qualified as a solicitor. I then got a political job with the UK Independence Party campaigning for Brexit. And at that time, shortly after I finished working for the UK Independence Party, there was news of Michael Barrymore, who was the most famous entertainer in the United Kingdom, trying to relaunch his career in the beginning of 2006. And I followed this case ever since the death of Stuart Lubbock in 2001 because I lived in the same town as Terry Lubbock, the father. And for years, I'd followed the case in the local papers, national papers, and it was clearly a case of great mystery. And when I saw Terry Lubbock reaching for the media and saying how bitterly he opposed Barrymore trying to launch his career again on Celebrity Big Brother, which is a reality TV show here, I wrote him a letter and said, look, I'm a qualified solicitor. I'm interested in the case. Can I help you? And as a result of that, keeping it brief, Terry showed me all the documents that were presented in the inquest. He'd got all the witness statements, all the experts' reports, the pathologists, the many witnesses, and I basically combed through all those and realized that the true story hadn't been told. And so I produced a dossier in the first 6 or 8 months, handed it to Essex Police, and 3 months later they began a full reinvestigation. That was late in 2006. So that's how it all started. I had no real experience in criminal cases of corruption, unsolved murders. This was new, really, but the evidence that this was a cover-up was so strong that I felt moved to carry on, and then came the book and a few other things as well.
Right, and for people who don't know, Barrymore was on this Big Brother show with who shows up as Jimmy Savile, which is really kind of creepy, who is kind of an infamous figure in the UK, and then the basketball player Dennis Rodman was on there too, so I think I mentioned that.
It was unbelievable. Yeah.
So, I mean, I saw Barrymore. I've been kind of trying to keep up with the case, but I saw him on Piers Morgan with his lawyer. So there's still kind of this, he's still around or trying to seek kind of some kind of public change or reform his image. Would you agree with that?
Yes, although I think that's come to nothing. The documentary that you referred to, I think we discussed last time, was quite a comprehensive documentary in terms of going through the main stages of the investigation and what happened and talking to Terry Lubbock. But unfortunately, despite my giving the makers of the documentary my book and explaining my theory, they completely dodged it in the documentary. And in fact, they had the nerve to call the documentary Barrymore Body in the Pool, which is precisely the thing which I found to be untrue when I first investigated it.
And your sorry to interrupt, but your differentiation, your theory is that he was put into the pool to make it look as a drowning, right? That's your opinion, is that correct?
No, I must correct that slightly. I don't think he was put in the pool. I don't think he was ever in the pool. And one of the things we might come to a bit later is that the very incompetent police investigation didn't do what's called a diatom test on the pool water. A diatom test would have told the police and everybody whether or not there was a human being in that pool. Had that test been done, it would have shown whether or not Stuart Lubbock was ever in that pool. But no, my contention is that the whole business of Stuart being in the pool and being rescued was complete fabrication, and that he was in fact probably killed about an hour and a half before the ambulance was called. And incidentally, William, the police now agree with that. 19 years later, they have admitted that Stuart was dead about an hour and a half before the ambulance was called, exactly as I said in my book. But what would be the point of throwing him in the water after he was dead and then fishing him out again? There'd be no point to that if you could simply fake a drowning by laying his body out at the side of the pool, throwing a bucket of water over him. And I don't know how much we went through this last time, but
it's been a while.
The witness statements, the 6 witness statements, as to how Stuart was allegedly found and allegedly pulled out of the pool were totally all over the place. 4 different people claimed to have been the first to see the body in the pool. One of them said that he found him first with the body floating at the top of the pool. Barrymore himself said that he found Stuart first, that he was staring up at him from the bottom of the pool. There were about 5 or 6 different accounts of who was at the pool when he was found, and so on. So my point there is that he was, all that we know for certain is when the ambulance crew arrived, he was at the side of the pool. Only those 6 lying witnesses claimed that he was ever in the pool. And there was no need to. If you think about it, even the police agree now that he was dead probably an hour and a half before he was found. Why would you go to the trouble of throwing his body in the pool, then having to get 2 people to dive in and pull him out? Can you see? There's no point.
Right, but I mean, they're trying to make a cover story, right, for what happened, right?
Yes.
So, it's allegedly trying to make a cover story for what really happened. But that, is there anything like fairly new that has developed from this with Barrymore or anything? I mean, do you care to comment about his discussion with Piers Morgan?
Oh, well, yeah, I could not believe that Piers Morgan lowered himself to give that softball interview to Barrymore, and it was clearly an attempt to revive his career yet again. And but Piers Morgan is a talented man, but to see him waste his talents in just doing a soft soap interview with Barrymore was terrible. But let me bring you up to date, because soon after that interview with Piers Morgan, Essex Police, and following the documentary as well, Essex Police announced a reward, initially £20,000 and then £40,000 for further information about the death of Stuart Lubbock. I was never persuaded that this was likely to be successful, but nevertheless, the police went on camera, gave a statement that they now believed that Stuart had been dead an hour and a half before he was found by the side of the pool by the ambulance crew. And having made that announcement, about 3 or 4 months later, they arrested one of those at the pool, Barrymore's lover at the time, Jonathan Kenny.
Yeah, I remember that name. Yeah.
And so Jonathan Kenny was arrested. Where are we now?
I'm just kind of showing the audience just the Sun's thing about this.
Yeah.
February 2020. This is.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That might be the old one.
No, I think that's. Yeah. Anyway, he. The police having arrested Jonathan Kenny, of course, Terry, the father, was very excited about this, and the police made a number of statements. The main one was, we've had new evidence from a witness, and then a bit later they put it out in the media that they had a strong case and that the arrests would be made anytime soon. None of that has happened. Just an interesting point here, William, that when I was about to publish my book in July 2007, 2 weeks before it was published, the publication date, the police arrested 3 people: Michael Barrymore, Jonathan Kenny, and Justin Merritt. So the timing was a little bit odd. It was just before we were about to launch our book with a press conference, etc. Now this time round, the 20th anniversary of Stuart's death was coming up on the 1st of April 2021, just a couple of months ago. Once again, most strangely, just 2 weeks before that anniversary, that was the moment when the police announced an arrest of Jonathan Kenny. Now, the significance of that is that I was contacted during the lead up to the 20th anniversary by many media companies, television, and so on, who wanted to do a big 20-year update, as the media do, 20th anniversary, going into the case as a whole. Now, all of that was spiked by the police making this arrest, because the matter then becomes more or less sub judice. You can't say too much about it in case of the prejudicing a trial. So I think it's a kind of rerun of what happened 20 years ago. The police making a convenient arrest to make it look as if they're doing something, but in fact nothing has happened. And can I just tell you that in advance of this program, I spoke to Terry Lubbock tonight. He's not very well. He's pretty dejected about his health and about the lack of an arrest. And I asked him if he had a message for the American audience. By the way, he was delighted to know there was such interest in the case in America. And he said, Tony, look, tell them that, he said 2 things. He says, tell them that I don't think the police really mean to get to the bottom of it. And the second thing he said is that he felt the country as a whole was going to the dogs. And he obviously mentioned the recent case of Daniel Morgan, which knows about, which has been the major talking point in Britain this week.
Can you elaborate on that and why it's all over the news in the UK? And I've talked to somebody, Daniel Morgan case. His name is Kieran Goggins. If people want to go back through the list of my interviews, you can hear me discuss this very important case out of the UK.
There's so much to talk about. It's very hard to summarize it, but just the main points, William. In 1987, we're going back 34 years, Daniel Morgan was found with an axe in his head in a pool of blood outside a pub in South London. He was a private investigator, and one of the claims made by his brother, Alistair Morgan, who's been fighting for justice for 34 years, is that he had homed in on a network of police corruption, that is, private investigators and media and corrupt criminals and gangsters all working together to allow criminal gangs to flourish with the help of senior police officers. Now, again, very, very briefly, following that, over the next 25 years, there were 6 separate investigations, reviews, if you like, by other police forces. Hampshire Police was one of them, and then various other forces. Now, when it came to about 10 years ago, the family, led by Alistair Morgan, the brother, who's run a brilliant campaign for 34 years, he and other family members sat down with the top police officers and said, look, this inquiry, I don't want any single police officer involved in this case who is a Freemason. I want every single police officer to sign a declaration that they are not and never have been a Freemason. It's quite unprecedented. I think you'd agree.
I agree, definitely.
Yeah. So that sixth investigation proceeded for about 2 or 3 or 4 years with, if the police were honest, dozens of police officers, all not Freemasons, committed to getting to the truth. Now, at the end of that review, the sixth review recommended that 3 people should be charged with murder. One of them was called Jonathan Rees, and I can't quite put my name on the other 2, but they were people who were associated with Daniel Morgan and who had reason to fear that Daniel Morgan might have implicated them. To cut a long story short, this did go to trial, and it appeared to be heading towards a major criminal trial. But just before it started, the police suddenly found a whole sheaf of additional evidence, and the judge, the single judge who was deciding preliminary matters, decided that the new evidence was so significant that he could not proceed with the trial, and so the trial was aborted. And obviously the family were crushed at that news, and bit by bit they persuaded politicians, their member of parliament and others, to launch an unusual public inquiry led by a barrister called Nuala O'Lone. And about 4 weeks ago, she handed her report to our Home Secretary.
It's a Priti Patel, right?
Priti Patel. She initially said that she wasn't going to release it until she'd looked at it and redacted it. However, on Monday this week, the report was published. And if you look at the headlines in the British press, she was absolutely scathing, and she used these words, and I quote, "The Metropolitan Police were institutionally corrupt." And on the back of that, calls have been made by the inquiry team and by many politicians for the head of the Metropolitan Police to resign. And she won't, of course. And really, this vindicates the investigations I've done into 2 or 3 cases, which all end up with a network of police corruption. And probably in the Lubbock case, it's more difficult to prove than others. But in the Lubbock case, there was corruption. It's just that corruption is hard to prove.
Right, but what was the other case about the guy who ended up in the cement mixer? What was the case you worked on that was also, you said, you found corruption about?
Yes, after I got involved in the Lubbock case in 2006, many people came to me for help, thinking I could solve other mysteries. One case stood out, and that was the case of a young man, 33-year-old man called Lee Balkwell. And the story that was accepted by the police was that he had been crushed in a cement mixer at 1 o'clock in the morning, and that it was all a tragic accident. And he came to see me at the end of 2006. So bear in mind, I'd not investigated these sorts of things at all in my life, but he then unfolded me a series of events from which it was absolutely plain that, just like the Lubbock case, there was a cover story, a fake reason for the death. And I discovered that by analysing the CCTV of the night's events and all the documents, or as many as we could get hold of, that it was quite clear that although he'd been working on the concrete mixer early in the evening, he had clearly been placed in the concrete mixer, and the concrete mixer switched on almost certainly after he's dead. And I can say that because Britain's probably top pathologist, Richard Shepherd, has recently done a major report on the case, and his report is far better than any other, much more comprehensive, and he has absolutely nailed the fact that Lee must have been dead when he was placed by others on the concrete mixer. And it's not a case, William, that's reached quite the same level as publicity, but it's just as terrible a cover-up of a murder as the Lubbock case.
Right, and this Daniel Morgan case too. I mean, even to today, didn't they say this lady Cressida Dick was kind of trying to keep the inquiry from what they say contributed to a wider lack of candor? They said here. So, what do you think? Like, not only your position, but what's the UK kind of public's view of this whole situation, this Daniel Morgan findings?
Yeah, if I can just say, in addition, Cressida Dick was criticised for actually frustrating the inquiry and blocking it and denying access to documents, which is about as serious as an accusation as you can get. It's rather strange. You'd expect the media to be running stories every day, seeking to hound out Cressida Dick. She seems to be one of those people, William, who is sort of Teflon character. Nothing seems to stick to her at all. And of course, you'll probably remember that she is the one who effectively ordered the killing of a young man in London. I forget the name now, but he was Cressida Dick identified him as a suspected terrorist, and a group of police officers killed him on the tube. But it was found out that he was a recent immigrant from Brazil who was working in the locality and had nothing to do with it. And so it's a bit of a mystery why, having been in charge of that spectacularly failed investigation, 2 years later she's promoted to the I would blame our media for not covering this sufficiently. If it was a politician they wanted to get rid of, the media would be all over the case. But they're not. We've moved on to other things, Boris Johnson and other things. So.
Right, and I mean, I just think, like, do you think that this just institutional corruption is due to them just wanting to cover up their own corruption, or just to what do you think the real kind of overarching purpose of this stuff?
I've not read the whole report, but I've been briefed on the main points. If we look at the connections here, there is a major connection to somebody called Andy Coulson. Andy Coulson used to be the editor of the News of the World, and he was actually the editor of the News of the World at the time of the Lubbock case. And some years later, he became the chief political secretary of our Prime Minister, David Cameron. And he was implicated in the background in connection with the Daniel Morgan case, to the extent that he is alleged to have conspired in some way to keep the real story out of the newspapers. So, but not only that, the report by Nuala alone suggests that specific police officers with very senior positions actively tried to frustrate the inquiry. And for example, in the reviews, I mentioned these first 5 reviews that were held, which were unsuccessful. They actually had Met police officers on the reviews, more or less monitoring what was going on. So the police are being criticised. Of course, with Andy Coulson, having worked for many years for David Cameron, this goes right up to major politicians in the country as well. Andy Coulson, by the way, had to resign from that post because he was implicated in the scandal of tapping telephone calls.
Right. That was a huge scandal there in the UK, right?
Another scandal.
Yeah, huge scandal. Yeah. So those are really interesting things. Do you care to talk a little bit about your involvement in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann?
Yes, I'm quite happy to do so. Again, just to give you some background, I've told you that it was January 2006 that I was given the Lubbock case to investigate, and I could scarcely believe the extent of the cover-up in that case. I could not believe that such an obvious case of a fake drowning had been covered up so successfully. Then came the Lee Borkwell case in December, I think it was, that year that he came to see me, and I started investigating that. And then on the back of that came the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, which was occurred. She was reported missing on the 3rd of May in 2007. So by this time, I was spending all my time looking at cover-ups and cases of injustice, and the McCanns were arrested in this case on the 7th of September 2007, which was my 60th birthday. And I remember talking to my wife right at the beginning and saying something isn't quite right here. What got my interest in the very first week was the stories of how allegedly the family were eating out in the restaurant about 100 yards away from where the children were, and allegedly going back every 15 minutes to check on them. Now, that seemed an unlikely scenario, very unlikely. And then somebody else said, oh, we were checking them every 30 minutes. And then somebody else said, we were checking them every hour. So in the very first week, there were these discrepancies. And I talked to my wife and said, who goes out to a restaurant and every 15 minutes walks a couple of minutes back to see if the children are right, and then walks back to have the next course and so on? It just seemed unreal. And I suppose, to cut a long story short, I got deeply involved in looking at the case, and at that time I wasn't really very familiar with the internet and how it worked, and I discovered almost by accident one of these internet chat rooms, forums, where people openly, hundreds of people, almost thousands in fact, very early on, were discussing the case, and they were all of a like mind that this wasn't an abduction. And so I got to work on the case and studied it from what information we had, and of course a lot of information has come out since. And originally I did think that this story of the children being neglected to the extent of them being left in their apartment while they were eating, I thought that was probably true, although unlikely. So I decided to attempt a private prosecution of the McCanns for having neglected their children, leaving 3 children aged 3 and 2 on their own. And I researched this very carefully and discovered that although this happened in a foreign country, in fact, according to the European Convention on Legal Matters, the host country is responsible for prosecution. So, in other words, if a British resident has neglected children in Portugal, then it's the British government who has the jurisdiction to investigate. So I wrote off to the Magistrates' Court in Leicestershire, saying, look, on their own admission, they were leaving these children 100, 200 yards away for 6 days in a row on their own admission. I think they should be prosecuted for child neglect under the Children and Young Persons Act 1933, which covers this. Now, I got a very swift response from that. No sooner as I handed in this letter, then within 2 days, I got a letter from the High Court in London saying that there was absolutely no question of there being any jurisdiction in this country, contrary to what I'd read, and so my summons wouldn't be proceeded with. This was publicised. The summons obviously never got off the ground, but when people saw that there was somebody standing up publicly and challenging the McCann's account, I was overwhelmed with inquiries, and as a result of that, a few of us got together a small group called the Madeline Foundation, and we began investigating and publishing material on the case. And I'm not sure whether you're aware, probably not, but I'm cutting a very long story short, but in December 2008, which was about a year and a half after she disappeared, I published a book called the title was What Really Happened to Madeleine McCann, 60 Reasons Which Suggest She Wasn't Abducted. And this again made a big impact because nobody had dared to question this before. And the book started selling quite well. We got many more members. New material was coming out from the Portuguese investigation. Of course, by this time, the McCanns had been arrested by the Portuguese police and made official suspects in the case.
Yeah, there was a huge investigation in Portugal, right? I mean, it involved a lot of resources, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, very much so. A lot of resources in Portugal, but also significant. One of the most significant moments was when the Portuguese police contacted Scotland Yard, the Metropolitan Police in London. And possibly one of the most significant developments in the whole case was when the British police, Metropolitan Police, somebody called Mark Harrison, said to the Portuguese police, look, you need to have sniffer dogs in there to see if there's any evidence that there was a body in the flat. And he then recommended somebody called Martin Grime, who was arguably one of the world's top dog handlers. Incidentally, William, he now works for the FBI in exactly the same capacity, and I believe he's been instrumental in helping to solve 1 or 2 murders in the United States. Martin Grime, his name is. And Martin Grime took his 2 sniffer dogs called Keela and Eddie to Portugal in the end of July, beginning of August 2007. And one of them was a blood dog, and one of them was one that specialized in the scent of a corpse, cadaver scent. And I can say all this quite freely because it's factual. I'm not making this up. Nobody can deny it. The sniffer dog found the scent of blood the scent of a corpse in a total of 11 different locations associated with the McCanns. That's in the flat, in the children's bedroom, in the main room, on the veranda, in the McCann's car. And the blood dog also found traces of blood in the McCann's flat living room, and in the car, and on a key fob as well. And I suppose really that alone, when that news leaked out and was publicised in the British press, of course, there was huge, massive interest. And for me, that was probably sufficient to persuade me that, in fact, the young girl had died. However the death had occurred, but the evidence seemed to point to the death having occurred in the flat at whose hands we don't know and how we don't know, but the evidence seemed so strong that I carried on, as you know, with my researches and then published the book a year later.
And that the case has just really gone global. There's a huge documentary, I think a 6-part documentary on Netflix and on all kinds of podcasts. They always mention the Madeleine McCann case. They're just, people are, because of this huge saga from 2007 to the present, to the people are still discussing. It's really kind of a global true crime case. Would you agree with that?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, the whole world knows about Madeleine McCann. Of course, this case is still in the news very much because the Scotland Yard have latched onto a rather strange German character called Christian Bruckner, and they now are holding him out as the chief suspect in the case. So it's very much in the news still. But yes, of course, there was interest across the world. I have to say, on the Netflix documentary, William, I've not seen it, but I've seen reports of the contents, and I'm afraid they left out all kinds of key evidential points in that documentary.
It wouldn't be the first time in a so-called ostensibly true crime documentary that happens. So it's actually very common. Yeah, I found that in a lot. They're much more interested, in my opinion. A lot of those true crime documentaries are more interested in creating drama than actually laying out the facts in a very cogent manner.
Sure. If I can just take the spotlight off myself for a minute. If people are looking for a real penetrating investigation into the truth of this case, and I'm not saying what he says is 100% accurate, but I would really strongly recommend that people Google the name Richard Hall alongside Madeleine McCann, and he has made some brilliant documentaries with many of the facts revealed, and on limited resources this man has done amazing work and far excels Netflix in terms of his handling of the real forensic and other circumstantial evidence in the case.
And all of his work is available online. I think he put it out there for free, if I remember correctly.
Yes, he has. Yes, yeah, and people can copy it and
Richard Hall.
Richard Hall. Yeah. But as I've explained to you before we went live, I can't really say too much about my own opinion, other than to say that I don't think she was abducted, and as to what really happened, I've had my thoughts. I've been told by the courts that I can't repeat them anymore. I can't make any libelous claims about the McCann. So, having been taken to court and given a 3-month prison sentence suspended, if I say much more than I already have done, I'm at danger of being imprisoned. And
well, let's not do that. Let's not make that happen. We are at 40 minutes, so if there's anything, Anthony, you'd like to add as we kind of wrap up, or anything, where can people reach out to you? Social media, email account, anything like that?
Well, the one thing I would like to do while we've got the time is refer to my book. Now, on the Lubbock case. Now, my book on the Lubbock case is sold out, and I could go and get it reprinted, but I'm getting on in life and don't want to go to the trouble. But what I have done about 3 months ago is I made the whole book free for anyone who wants to have a look at the.
What's the title of the book, Anthony?
Not Awight, spelt Awight. Not Awight, Getting Away with Murder.
And can people find that? Is it available online? Not.
Right, I believe it's being sold on Amazon, but not with my consent, and at an inflated price. People have copied it and are trying to sell it. Don't buy it, whatever you do. You can get the whole book free from me by writing to my email address. Do you want me to give it now?
Yes, please.
So AJS for sugar, Bennett, BENNETT at btinternet.com.
And I will put that up on the show notes.
If anybody writes to me that email, as soon as I see it, they'll get the whole book in download. Only missing the photographs and the diagram, but everything else will be there in this download. And please tell people they can get it and read it for themselves, and they will see the nature of the cover-up, the contradictions, the lies, the problems that the pathologist had in solving it, the fact that the pathologist concluded he was asphyxiated, not drowned. It's all in there. It's all in my book, all the detail.
And that title comes from Barrymore's statement. He would say Awight. He kind of had this little catchphrase. So the title, again, is not Awight. Getting Away with Murder by Anthony Bennett.
That's it.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
I hope some of your listeners will read up on the Lubbock case in more detail. Then I think it will prove to them that this was a hoax and a cover-up. And I think it will also suggest to them very strongly that the police were corrupt in their investigation. So I'd like to wish you all well. Terry Lubbock would like to thank you as well for having showcased his case, and he very much appreciates the good wishes. And if anybody writes to me for the book, if they want to have a message for Terry Lubbock, who's not very well at the minute, if they'd like to include a short message, I'll pass it on to him.
Awesome. And again, the name is Anthony Bennett. The book is Not Awight, Getting Away with Murder. I'll put it up in the show notes. And we cover Daniel Morgan, Madeline McCann, and the unfortunate, untimely death of Stuart Lubbock. Thank you so much, Anthony.
Okay, thank you.
All right, bye-bye.